John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier married in Newport, Rhode Island, uniting political ambition with cultural refinement. Kennedy's Boston Irish family and wartime service shaped a disciplined public trajectory, while Jacqueline's training in journalism and languages informed her poise and independence. Their household included 2 children who survived infancy and a White House shaped by her emphasis on history, arts, and careful presentation. They navigated constant public scrutiny, managing official duties, travel, and ceremonial responsibilities that defined the early 1960s. Kennedy's presidency centered on Cold War management, civil rights pressures, and a stated commitment to space exploration. Jacqueline acted as a diplomatic presence, conducting televised tours of restored public rooms to emphasize national heritage. The assassination in Dallas in November of 1963 ended the administration abruptly. In the days that followed, Jacqueline directed the ceremonial frame, selecting details that would signal continuity of the American state. Her decisions around ritual and setting created a lasting reference point for subsequent national mourning. Jacqueline remarried years later, working in publishing in New York and protecting her children's privacy. She died in the mid-1990s after an illness treated in Manhattan. Her public image, once focused on youth and style, had settled into a profile of stewardship, emphasizing historical preservation and editing work. Family and advisors affirmed that she would be buried beside the president, a choice consistent with earlier planning and with her role in shaping the memorial site. The graves are at Arlington National Cemetery on a hillside with direct views across the Potomac to Washington. The presidential plot is anchored by the eternal flame, first lit during the state funeral and maintained continuously. White granite markers record names and pivotal dates in a restrained layout. Nearby are the graves of 2 children, as well as related Kennedy family plots within the cemetery grounds. The site's approach follows a controlled path that accommodates daily visitors while preserving a solemn setting. The burial signifies a national resting place for a first couple, aligning personal remembrance with state symbolism. Kennedy's public image defined by service and crisis management, and Jacqueline's careful curatorial work converge at the Arlington plot. The combination of a living flame, measured inscriptions, and proximity to other national memorials presents a concise record of a presidency and its enduring associations preserved within a military cemetery that functions as a civic archive in stone. Martin Luther King Jr. met Coretta Scott in Boston while studying theology, and they married in Alabama, forming a partnership grounded in ministry and organized advocacy. King's upbringing in a multi-generation Atlanta clergy household informed his leadership style, while Coretta's musical training and early activism shaped her public voice. Their family life developed alongside constant travel, jailings, and negotiations, with Coretta maintaining the home front and speaking at rallies when King was absent. The couple framed their work as a shared calling, connecting local campaigns to national policy. King emerged as a central figure in the mid-century civil rights movement through disciplined nonviolent strategy, coalition building, and nationally broadcast oratory. Coretta advanced peace and civil rights initiatives, organizing concerts and speaking tours that supported movement logistics. The Montgomery Campaign, the Birmingham Campaign, and the March on Washington formed a visible arc that linked Southern struggles to federal action. After King's death in April of 1968, Coretta extended the message globally, linking racial justice to human rights and economic equity, while managing the preservation of papers and speeches. King's burial became a focal point for mourners, first at a local cemetery, then at a permanent memorial overseen by the family. Coretta sustained the work through the King Center, serving as its principal steward for decades. She died in the mid-2000s after a period of declining health, having established an institutional framework to hold archives, education programs, and commemorations. Their children participated in governance and public events, reinforcing an intergenerational approach to memory. Their tomb rests at the King Center in Atlanta, set on a marble platform within a reflecting pool that encourages quiet visitation. An Eternal-style light and engraved quotations frame the site, while the adjacent Ebenezer Baptist Church anchors the landscape in the couple's pastoral origin. The crypt displays their names and pivotal dates in a balanced layout, aligned with walkways that manage steady public attendance. The surrounding campus houses exhibits and archival materials that support research and instruction. The shared memorial integrates private grief with public education, positioning a family-led site at the heart of a national civil rights district. King's oratory and strategy and Coretta's sustained institution building converge in a setting that emphasizes continuity. The arrangement affirms a partnership that extends beyond one leader's lifetime, translating movement history into a stable place of record, instruction, and remembrance. Ronald Reagan and Nancy Davis met as working actors in post-war Hollywood and married in Los Angeles, establishing a partnership that mixed performance discipline with political communication. Reagan's Midwestern upbringing and union leadership at the Screen Actors Guild shaped a managerial style that translated to public office. Nancy's training and industry experience informed an attentive approach to image, scheduling, and staff relationships. Their family life developed alongside Reagan's shift from entertainment to public affairs, first through speeches and statewide broadcasts, then through electoral campaigning. Reagan served 2 terms as California governor, then advanced to the presidency in the early 1980s with a platform focused on economic deregulation, tax policy, and a strong defense posture. The administration cultivated a communication strategy that emphasized thematic messaging and televised addresses. Nancy promoted substance abuse awareness through the widely publicized Just Say No initiative, engaged in advocacy for foster grandparents, and took interest in White House restoration projects. Critics and supporters debated budget priorities, social policy, and Cold War negotiations, which later included arms control milestones. Reagan announced an Alzheimer's diagnosis in the mid-1990s, and Nancy organized caregiving and public education that drew sustained attention to the disease. He died in the early 2000s in California after a long decline. Nancy remained active in library programs and policy forums, speaking about caregiving, medical research, and the value of archival preservation. She died more than a decade later in Los Angeles, with ceremonies that emphasize their long marriage and public partnership. Both are buried at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, on a terrace overlooking the Santa Susana Mountains. The grave setting features a stone wall inscribed with a favored quotation, a simple lawn panel, and a walkway that channels visitor movement across the memorial courtyard. The library complex houses papers, exhibits, and a Cold War gallery that contextualize the presidency within late 20th century history. The resting place's elevation and open sky reinforce the site's role as a vantage point on curated memory. The shared interment links a political marriage to an institutional campus designed for education and commemoration. Reagan's emphasis on communication and policy themes, and Nancy's stewardship of image and advocacy, converge at a location that pairs archival infrastructure with a quiet grave. The arrangement offers visitors a clear sequence, from museum interpretation to outdoor reflection, aligning personal remembrance with the formal record of a presidency. George Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara Pierce met as teenagers in New England and married before the end of the Second World War. Bush's naval service in the Pacific and his Yale education set a course toward business, then public life. Barbara's steadiness, literacy interest, and management of a large family supported frequent relocations tied to energy ventures and campaigns. Their partnership carried them through posts in Congress, diplomacy, intelligence leadership, and the vice presidency, with Barbara acting as a visible and plain-spoken figure in schools and community programs. Bush's presidency at the close of the Cold War involved coalition building, a United Nations-backed campaign in the Persian Gulf, and domestic debates over taxation and recession. Barbara advanced broad-based literacy work through a foundation that supported family reading and community instruction. Their public image emphasized duty, restraint, and a sense of continuity across changing administrations. Supporters praised foreign policy experience and civility, while critics weighed economic performance and budget choices that shaped midterm outcomes. Barbara died in the late 2000s in Houston after a period of declining health, with ceremonies at St. Martin's Episcopal Church reflecting a lifelong faith tradition. Bush followed months later, having lived with reduced mobility and the after-effects of long service. State honors included a train procession across Texas that connected public witnessing with regional remembrance. The close timing of their deaths reinforced a narrative of companionship, continuity, and family-centered public service. Both are buried on the grounds of the George Bush Presidential Library in College Station, in a garden plot near the resting place of their daughter Robin, whose death in early childhood marked the family's early years. The setting features simple granite markers, trimmed lawn, and controlled pathways that accommodate regular visitors and school groups. The nearby museum and archives hold records from decades in public life, including diplomatic correspondence and domestic policy files. The overall layout balances accessibility with quiet, allowing private reflection within an educational campus. Their shared burial aligns a life of service with an institutional site designed for study and commemoration. The proximity to their child's grave adds a family dimension to a public memorial, presenting a complete record of household and state. In College Station, the couple's image of steadiness and civic duty concludes in a place that preserves documentation, welcomes visitors, and situates remembrance within a broader historical collection. Frank Sinatra and Barbara Blakely. Marx married in Palm Springs after long careers that placed them within overlapping circles of entertainment and philanthropy. Sinatra's New Jersey upbringing, early band work, and solo breakthrough created a national profile that spanned recordings, films, and live residencies. Barbara's experience as a model and show host preceded her work in charitable programs in the Coachella Valley. Their partnership gathered family and friends around seasonal desert routines, with Barbara acting as an organizer of social and fundraising events that reflected local commitments. Sinatra's public contributions included a vast recorded catalog, film performances that earned major awards, and collaborations with arrangers and bandleaders who shaped mid-century American popular music. He also engaged in political fundraising, civil rights support at select moments, and notable philanthropy in Southern California. Barbara co-founded the Barbara Sinatra Children's Center in Rancho Mirage, which specialized in counseling and advocacy for children affected by abuse, operating with clinical partners and community donors. Public attention followed both cultural output and civic engagements, while controversies reflected shifting reputations across decades. Sinatra died in the late 1990s in Los Angeles after a series of health complications that had reduced his performance schedule. Barbara continued operating the Children's Center, overseeing expansions in outreach and education with a board of advisors. She died in the late 2000s in Rancho Mirage, remembered locally for sustained institutional leadership that extended beyond celebrity ties. Family, colleagues, and community members marked both passings with services that balanced privacy and public acknowledgement. Both are buried at Desert Memorial Park in Cathedral City, within a section that includes numerous entertainers and community figures. Sinatra's marker carries his name and a brief epitaph favored by admirers, set in a flat bronze style common to the park. Barbara's marker lies adjacent, matching the restrained design that characterizes the cemetery's landscape. The grounds present organized rows, trimmed desert plantings, and clear signage, allowing regular visitors to locate the plots without disrupting other services. Their shared resting place places a world-known performer and a regional philanthropic leader within a communal cemetery that serves the Coachella Valley. The site's accessibility corresponds to public interest, while the understated markers maintain a tone of measured remembrance. In Cathedral City, recordings, films, and charitable programs resolve into a quiet pair of graves situated among neighbors who built a desert community that supported their later years. Walter Elias Disney met Lillian Bounds at the studio in Los Angeles, where she worked as an ink artist, and they married during the company's early growth. Disney's Midwestern upbringing and apprenticeship in commercial art shaped a pragmatic approach to production, while Lillian's judgment and candor influenced story decisions and the naming of key characters. Their household included 2 daughters, with family routines arranged around demanding schedules that combined animated shorts, feature development, and evolving park plans. Lillian's presence balanced creative enthusiasm with attention to budget and workplace culture. Disney's public contributions include the standardization of synchronized sound in animated shorts, the introduction of Technicolor to cartoons, and the development of feature-length animation that redefined the medium. Studio innovations in multiplane cinematography and effects won recognition that extended to live action and documentary projects. The couple's vision expanded to physical space with Disneyland, which tested operations, logistics, and themed storytelling at civic scale. Lillian supported philanthropic and arts institutions in Southern California, extending the studio's civic footprint through gifts and board service. Disney died in the late 1960s in Burbank after a sudden illness that halted active planning for a Florida resort and further film projects. Lillian continued philanthropic work, backing concert halls, museum collections, and community programs that linked the family name to education and performance. She died in the late 1990s in Los Angeles, with tributes emphasizing long service to arts organizations and quiet influence within the studio's formative decades. Family, colleagues, and alumni underscored the durable infrastructure built under their stewardship. Both are interred at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, within the private Disney family area. The small courtyard mausoleum incorporates stone walls, wrought iron, and plantings that create a secluded enclosure away from main visitor routes. Markers identify individual family members with restrained inscriptions, consistent with the cemetery's emphasis on orderly landscaping and privacy. Access is limited, and most visitors acknowledge the site from a respectful distance, guided by maps that outline general sections rather than precise coordinates. The private mausoleum reflects a division between a highly public legacy and a family-centered memorial. Animated features, themed environments, and a global brand are documented in archives and museums, while the graves remain deliberately quiet. The arrangement reinforces the distinction between public exhibition and private remembrance, situating the couple's resting place in a sheltered corner of a large cemetery that has long served the Hollywood community. Johnny Cash and June Carter met through the close circles of country music, where family ties and touring schedules brought frequent collaborations. Cash's Arkansas upbringing, military service, and early recordings at Sun Studios established a voice associated with narrative restraint and moral conflict. June, a member of the Carter family, combined songwriting, comedy, and stagecraft learned from a pioneering country lineage. Their marriage formalized a partnership that mixed performance and personal accountability, with June's steadiness and musical instincts supporting Cash through demanding tours and periods of recovery. Their public contributions spanned albums, concert films, and television appearances that widened the audience for American roots music. Cash's prison concerts at Folsom and San Quentin positioned live recordings as social documents, while June's songwriting, including a signature contribution to a shared repertoire, linked modern production to earlier traditions. Collaborations with contemporary artists in later decades brought renewed attention to spare arrangements and narrative lyrics, with awards recognizing the endurance of a straightforward performance style. The couple's stage presence illustrated a dialogue between tradition and reinvention that influenced country and folk music internationally. Health difficulties followed years of travel and chronic conditions, leading to reduced schedules and carefully managed sessions. June died in the early 2000s in Nashville following complications from surgery. Cash, already limited by illness, recorded final tracks that emphasized voice and text over instrumentation, then died a few months later. Mourners from across the music community attended services that balanced public tribute with the privacy of a family whose history reached back to the early days of radio and barn dance broadcasts. Both are buried at Hendersonville Memory Gardens in Tennessee, in adjacent graves marked by granite stones with clear inscriptions. The plot lies within a section that includes other country music figures with trimmed lawns and a predictable grid that allows steady visitor traffic without congestion. Personal tokens, such as guitar picks, handwritten notes, and small flowers, appear periodically and are cleared according to cemetery policy. The marker's design emphasizes legibility and alignment, consistent with the site's overall order and maintenance practices. Their shared resting place reinforces a partnership that joined two strands of American music, studio craft, and family tradition. Cash's measured baritone and narrative focus, and June's musicianship and grounding influence, find closure in quiet stones that receive regular, respectful visitation. The setting in Hendersonville situates their memory within the geography of their work, close to studios, stages, and radio houses that documented a long collaboration in song. Kirk Douglas and Ann Bidens met in Europe during film production and married in the mid-20th century, forming a partnership that balanced a demanding studio schedule with a cosmopolitan household. Douglas's upbringing in a working-class immigrant family informed persistent ambition, stage training, and a transition to film that capitalized on intensity and discipline. Ann's multilingual background and experience in production offices and publicity shaped a steady managerial presence. Their family life included active involvement with their sons' careers and careful oversight of business and philanthropic commitments. Douglas's public contributions span notable films across the studio and post-studio eras, including productions he helped initiate through an independent company. He used his leverage to support screen credit for a blacklisted writer, a decision later cited in accounts of the end of formal blacklisting. Ann Co. led philanthropic projects emphasizing education, healthcare, and arts institutions in Los Angeles and beyond. Together, they supported playgrounds, hospital programs, and scholarship funds that reflected attention to practical community needs. Douglas lived to an advanced age, publishing memoirs and engaging with cultural institutions even after a serious injury altered daily routines. He died in the early 2000s in Los Angeles, followed the next year by Ann, who had continued their shared charitable oversight. Public statements from family and beneficiary organizations noted the durability of their giving. Structured through foundations and targeted grants, tributes emphasized professionalism, longevity, and an organized approach to legacy planning. Both are buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, a compact cemetery that holds numerous entertainment figures. Their plot presents restrained markers with names and dates in a consistent typeface, aligned to the park's modest lawns and hedges. The setting is accessible yet quiet, with narrow paths that guide visitors past a concentrated history of mid-century film and television. Flowers and small stones appear periodically, cleared by staff according to routine maintenance schedules. The shared resting place reflects a marriage defined by work, organization, and philanthropy, concluded in a cemetery known for measured remembrance rather than grand display. Douglas's assertive screen presence and independent producing, and Ann's administrative and charitable leadership resolve into adjacent stones within a calm urban enclave. The location reinforces a civic legacy anchored in practical gifts and a long record of participation in Los Angeles cultural life. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall met during the production of a wartime film in California, where rehearsals and shared scenes led to a relationship that bridged age, studio hierarchy, and a demanding publicity environment. Bogart's New York upbringing and early Broadway work preceded a screen career built on terse dialogue and disciplined presence. Bacall's modeling and stage training supported a confident debut that matched his tempo. They married, raised 2 children, and managed a household that alternated between set schedules, location shoots, and time aboard a small boat favored for privacy on the California coast. Bogart's public contributions included a sequence of films that defined a mid-century screen archetype, combining crime narratives with moral ambiguity. Work with a set of directors and cinematographers produced films that later anchored repertory programs and preservation efforts. Bacall extended her range from film to stage and television, earning recognition for sustained work across decades. Public attention followed their on-screen collaborations and the social circles around the studio system, as well as later projects that placed Bacall in prominent roles independent of the earlier partnership. Bogart died in the late 1950s in Los Angeles after an illness that curtailed public appearances. Memorial gatherings in the industry underscored the impact of his wartime and post-war roles on studio identity. Bacall returned to New York, balanced work with family life, and built a long career that included notable stage performances and published reflections. She died in the mid-2000s in Manhattan, with tributes referencing durability, craft, and a direct manner established at the start of her career. They do not share a grave. Bogart is interred at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, within a section that holds many film community figures. The setting features sloped lawns, manicured plantings, and markers that maintain the cemetery's consistent visual language. Bacall is buried at Beth David Cemetery in Elmont on Long Island, a separate site with its own traditions, layout, and visitor practices. The distance between the graves reflects family decisions and the practicalities of residence and heritage. The separate burials illustrate how a celebrated professional partnership can leave distinct footprints in memorial geography. Bogart's image remains tied to studio-era Los Angeles, while Bacall's later life and stage work align her remembrance with New York. Together, the 2 sites record parallel arcs that met in film history, but concluded in locations consistent with personal and family priorities. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz met on a studio set and married soon after, combining an actress's persistence with a bandleader's entrepreneurial energy. Ball's early years in upstate New York and steady ascent through modeling and film comedy prepared a versatile performer. Arnaz, born in Cuba and raised amid political upheaval, built a career in music and stage leadership that translated to screen charisma and production savvy. Their household mixed rehearsal schedules, writing conferences, and live audience tapings, with an approach to work that folded domestic life into creative planning. Their public contributions reshaped television production and syndication. Through Desilu, they backed a multi-camera system recorded on film, allowing higher image quality and reliable reruns. Storylines centered on marital humor and workplace mishaps, anchored by Ball's physical comedy and precise timing, and Arnaz's role as bandleader, foil, and producer. The business decisions behind ownership and distribution established a template for later sitcom economics. After their divorce, both continued in separate ventures, with Ball leading studio projects and Arnaz focusing on music and production consulting. Declines came with health problems and reduced public schedules. Arnaz died in the mid-1980s in California after an illness that concluded a life of touring and executive work. Ball died a few years later in Los Angeles following heart surgery complications, closing a long period of public affection sustained by constant syndication and archival retrospectives. Memorials highlighted their innovation, craft discipline, and the enduring familiarity of recurring episodes across generations of viewers. They do not share a grave. Ball is buried at Lakeview Cemetery in Jamestown, near family in western New York. Her marker sits within a family plot that reflects regional ties, with pathways that support steady tourism connected to a nearby museum and hometown landmarks. Arnaz is interred at Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills, on sloped ground typical of the cemetery's landscape sections. The 2 sites maintain clear signage and orderly maintenance, allowing routine visitation without large ceremonies. The separate resting places parallel their professional unity and later independence. A shared television legacy remains visible in archives and production history, while memorial geography follows family origins and industry residents. Together, Jamestown and Los Angeles hold complementary records of a partnership that defined early television and built the infrastructure that sustained it for decades. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow grew up in North Texas during the hard years of the early 20th century, where limited prospects and close-knit neighborhoods framed their early paths. Parker married young and later reconnected with family in Dallas, where writing and performance interests shaped a vivid personal style. Barrow's larger family moved frequently for work, and minor arrests preceded a shift towards sustained criminal activity. The 2 met through friends, forming a partnership that combined loyalty, restless travel, and reliance on a small circle of associates for shelter and supplies. Their public profile emerged through robberies, car thefts, and violent encounters with law enforcement across several states. Newspapers and circulated photographs amplified their notoriety, often romanticizing flight and defiance while ignoring the injuries and deaths tied to the raids. The group relied on stolen vehicles, back roads, and sympathetic contacts, leaving a trail of small-town fear and fascination. Law officers, working with state agencies, coordinated information to counter the mobility that had shielded the pair from capture. The partnership ended in Louisiana in the spring of the 1930s when a planned law enforcement stop resulted in their deaths at the roadside. The incident generated immediate press attention, contested accounts, and an influx of sightseers to nearby towns. Families managed identification, transport, and funeral arrangements under intense scrutiny, facing the practical burdens of burial amid ongoing investigation and public spectacle. The aftermath included legal proceedings for surviving associates and a steady flow of published narratives that shaped public memory. They do not share a grave. Parker is buried at Crown Hill Memorial Park in Dallas after earlier reinterment from a different cemetery chosen by family in the 1940s. The marker bears her name and a brief inscription selected by relatives. Barrow is buried at Western Heights Cemetery in Dallas in a section that also holds members of his family. Each site maintains routine rules regarding access and decorum, with simple markers and trimmed grass typical of urban cemeteries. The separate burials underscore a reality distinct from popular myth. A sensational narrative of criminal flight resolves into plain stones in two city cemeteries, placed by families who faced legal, financial, and social consequences. The geography of Dallas holds the final record, separating rumor from fact through fixed locations that mark private grief and public history without romantic framing. Dean Martin and Jane Beager married in Miami during Martin's transition from nightclub stages to national television, forming a household that blended entertainment schedules with steady family routines. Martin's Ohio upbringing, wartime service, and partnership in a comedy duo established a relaxed stage persona that later anchored solo records and broadcast variety shows. Jean, a former model, maintained a private profile while managing a large home and social obligations tied to industry work. Their marriage produced 3 children and spanned Martin's peak, touring, and studio years before ending in divorce. Martin's public contributions included a long run of popular albums, film comedies, and westerns, and leadership within a troupe of entertainers associated with Las Vegas showrooms. Television variety programs and celebrity roasts extended his reach, showcasing a conversational style that favored improvisation and musical standards. Jean's presence remained largely offstage, centered on family and discretion, with occasional public appearances that supported charitable events. Their separation reflected pressures common to high-visibility careers, yet family ties continued through adult children and shared gatherings. Decline followed years of travel, smoking, and illness that reduced Martin's performances and public outings. He died in the mid-1990s in Los Angeles, with memorials that emphasized his effortless phrasing and a calm approach to variety entertainment. Jean died in the mid-2000s, remembered by friends and family for poise and consistency across decades of change. Notices reflected a life connected to entertainment, yet oriented toward private roles rather than public campaigns. Both are interred at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, a compact cemetery known for understated markers among many figures of film and television. They do not share a single plot, but their graves lie within the same grounds on separate locations, each marked by simple inscriptions that align with the cemetery's restrained style. Visitors navigate narrow paths and hedge-lined sections that encourage quiet stops rather than large gatherings. The setting emphasizes continuity and modest scale in the midst of a dense urban district. Their nearby but separate resting places mirror a marriage that supported a shared family while concluding before late life. Martin's easygoing artistry and broad popular appeal, and Jean's steady management of home and social circles, resolve into individual stones within one small cemetery. Westwood's arrangement preserves proximity without conflating narratives, allowing family and admirers to mark each life distinctly while acknowledging the years they spent together. Gerald Rudolph Ford and Elizabeth Ann Bloomer met in Michigan after early marriages and careers that gave each a measure of independence. Ford's Grand Rapids upbringing, collegiate athletics, service in the Navy, and Yale law training prepared a methodical approach to politics. Betty's work in dance and retail set a foundation for poise, candor, and resilience. They married before Ford's first congressional campaign, settled into a disciplined household shaped by committee schedules and district travel, and raised 4 children while navigating the pace of Washington life. Ford's public contributions centered on steady legislative work, then an appointed vice presidency during a constitutional crisis, and a presidency focused on stabilization. he granted a controversial pardon to his predecessor, arguing for national closure, and pursued measured policies on inflation, energy, and foreign relations. Betty emerged as a consequential public figure through forthright discussions of health, addiction, and women's rights, modeling transparency that reduced stigma for countless families. She later co-founded a treatment center that set standards for clinical practice and public education. Ford died in the mid-2000s in California after years of declining health, following a long retirement that emphasized policy forums and library programs. Betty died several years later, remembered for humanitarian impact and practical leadership in recovery advocacy. State ceremonies in Washington and Michigan framed their passings as moments of civic reflection, with bipartisan tributes noting steadiness, openness, and service. Family members participated in public rites and private gatherings that connected official history to household continuity. Both are buried on the grounds of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum in Grand Rapids. The graves occupy a landscape terrace overlooking the river, with flat markers set within trimmed lawn and a low wall that defines a quiet court. Visitors exit the museum galleries onto the Memorial Walk, where inscriptions present names and pivotal dates in a restrained format. The campus integrates archives, exhibits, and the gravesite, enabling a direct passage from documentary records to outdoor remembrance. Their shared resting place aligns a practical presidency and an influential public health advocate with an institution built for access and study. Ford's emphasis on constitutional process and calm governance, and Betty's candid leadership in treatment and recovery converge in a setting that privileges clarity, modesty, and education. The museum grounds present a complete arc from civic decisions to personal memorial within one continuous public space. Dwight David Eisenhower and Mamie Geneva Dowd met in Texas during his early Army postings and married in Colorado, beginning a life shaped by constant moves and regimented schedules. Eisenhower's Kansas upbringing, West Point training, and mentorship under senior officers prepared him for large-scale command and coalition work. Mamie, raised in a prosperous Denver household, adapted to base life with practiced hospitality and attention to protocol. Their family centered around one surviving son, with routines ordered by inspections, briefings, and social duties that knit military communities together. Eisenhower's public contributions include leadership of Allied forces in Europe during the Second World War and 2 terms as president in the mid-century. His administration emphasized infrastructure, balanced budgets, and cautious Cold War management, including the Interstate Highway Program and measured responses to international crises. Mamie maintained a consistent public presence, setting a tone of approachability in the White House while keeping a disciplined private schedule. Supporters praised steady judgment and institutional loyalty, while critics debated civil rights, pace, and covert actions associated with the era. Health strains surfaced during the presidency, leading to procedures and careful monitoring that shaped travel and workload. Eisenhower died at a military hospital in the late 1960s, with national services reflecting a soldier's farewell and a president's memorial. Mamie lived a decade longer, dividing time between Washington ties and family settings. She died in the late 1970s, remembered for warmth, order, and a public style that matched mid-century expectations for a First Lady. Both are interred at the place of meditation on the campus of the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum and Boyhood Home in Abilene, Kansas. The chapel, designed for quiet reflection, holds simple crypts with inscriptions that include names and pivotal dates, alongside the resting place of their first son who died in childhood. The surrounding complex links a modest boyhood house to archival buildings and exhibits, guiding visitors from personal origins to national service. Landscaping favors clean lines, low plantings, and walkways that support continuous public access. Their shared resting place presents a complete narrative within a single block of a prairie town, from family beginnings to global command and domestic governance. Eisenhower's reputation for coalition leadership and prudence, and Mamie's steady management of public life, converge in a restrained setting that prioritizes clarity over spectacle. The Abilene campus functions as a documentary record and a graveside memorial, aligning private remembrance with a carefully maintained national archive.